Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Josh Smith Show. Today's guest is Dennis Zuck. Dennis is a super cool dude. Again, the cool thing about doing this podcast is these guys have backgrounds that I never knew about. I know Dennis through actually a good friend of ours, Donnie Wilson, and John Barkalow, guys like that work for Sitka Gear. Technically, Dennis actually works for Gore. Many of you would know Gore as like Gore-Tex. Gore actually owns Sitka, and Dennis has been involved at Sitka Gear since its maybe not necessarily its inception, but since Gore bought them out, and Sitka really became known as what it is today. Dennis was heavily involved in that whole process from the time that Gore bought Sitka all the way through to where they are today. And for a short time in there, he actually went to work at YETI when they were just a couple $100 million company. I say just, not that that's not a lot of money, but he helped take them to $1 billion in the public company that they are today. He had an opportunity to come back to Gore, where he had worked for years, and kind of take back over in the product management side at Sitka, and ultimately actually at Gore, where he does product management and stuff like that. Really thinks about the direction of all of the brands that fall under the Gore family besides just Sitka. Dennis is a cool dude. I've spent some time on the river fishing with him and Donnie catching some trout. Just an overall really great person. And quite frankly, I'll let you in on some stuff. We had some meetings that day where Dennis came to kind of help us do a little bit of strategy planning, helping us kind of grow up as a company. How do you plan for the years after that? We ended up offering Dennis a board seat. And so now I can actually say and kind of announce right here that he's now officially a board member of Montana Knife Company, adding him to Dick Boyce and Kip Folks is our board. So, we just have a small board, but very dynamic, amazing, accomplished people that actually do really different things and have different experience. Dennis was actually, and he didn't say this on the podcast, this is some things he told me last night over whiskey, but he is actually published on the first paper to ever image a beating heart, which is really cool. He helped develop the technology electrically to be able to do an MRI or things like that to actually image a heart in motion. He was also involved in some stuff where they did some of the very first brain surgery kind of research and development stuff where they did some electrostimulation, testing the brain a little bit, seeing what parts of the brain control what parts of the body, if that controls emotion, things like that. So he didn't really get into that on the podcast. He gets into some other really cool things, but I thought that'd be a cool little tidbit to lead this off. I think it was worth mentioning because he's so humble that it's kind of sometimes hard to get everything out of him. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Dennis Zuck. All right, Dennis Zuck, thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. I was thinking about it. We've been friends for a little while, but I actually don't know a heck of a lot about your background and how you kind of got to where you are. I only know you're pretty good at fishing. I know you're good at fishing and you work at Sitka. That's about all I know about you.
Oh gosh.
Even though we've spent a little time together.
How deep you want me to go?
Yeah, well, so Dennis, you just for people kind of starting out here, you work at Sitka and for Gore, I guess. What would be your official job title then?
Yeah, so I lead innovation. So who gets to have a title like that?
That's fancy.
Lead innovation, but I lead innovation for a series of brands we have. So Gore makes Gore-Tex and materials, but we also have brands. We own brands, and so Sitka is one of those brands. Not a lot of people know that. But also we own another one called Gorewear, which is kind of a cycling brand. We have another one named Viev. So it's kind of a lifestyle brand, lack of a better term. So I drive innovation. So Gore it's a materials company, right? So they created Gore-Tex. Everybody knows them for that. But we actually are probably biggest for doing stent grafts and implantable devices and filtration and, probably one in a phone you have and probably one in a car you drive, right?
Really?
Yeah, so pretty diverse company, does a lot of cool things. It's kind of been a big part of my career. I've been there now, over 20 years.
Really?
Yeah, long time.
How long's Gore been around? When did Gore start?
Gosh, like 50s. Like it's been around for a really, really long time. Like Gore-Tex was originally created in the early 70s, and that was kind of like a fourth, fifth product, right? They were doing wire and cable and filtration devices and all kinds of stuff. So been around a long time. We're a privately owned company and probably in the third generation of family.
American company.
Yeah, American company, yeah. So founded, their headquarters is Wilmington, Delaware. Not people say that a lot. Where your headquarters, Wilmington, Delaware. But we have places in Germany and Scotland and, Shenzhen and
Yeah.
really around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to and we'll kind of round it back to Gore, but where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast. So I grew up kind of close to the headquarters of Gore. My all my friends' dads work there. It's kind of the bigger place around. Grew up a whitetail hunting. I was big in the outdoors. Did a lot of fishing as a kid, and went in the Air Force actually when I was pretty young. Did biomedical engineering, so it's kind of like anybody's watched MASH.
Yeah,
MASH units. It's kind of what we did.
Really.
But kind of got a foundation in electrical engineering and kind of started at Gore designing MRI coils. So it was originally an R&D capacity, kind of imaging, things that image inside of your body when you hurt your knee or, have a pain in your head, right?
Yeah, it's wild because when you think of, everybody that I know that's around in our space, kind of in our ecosystem, just knows about Gore-Tex.
Yeah.
But the last thing I would name would be an MRI machine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, they're like a mutual fund of a company. Did that for a while, did implantable leads, so things that went into pacemakers, neurostimulation, peripheral nerve stimulation, and eventually found myself into fabrics. I was doing footwear, gloves, and accessories, and, met this crazy guy, Jonathan Hart, who, at that time was just, we didn't own Sitka. It was just part of the groups that we worked with, and became really great friends. And eventually, as they kind of came into the fold with Gore launching Optifade, right? So Gore created Optifade, not Sitka. It was, they were a launch partner. And as Sitka kind of came in, we decided that, Sitka was a great brand. They had a great idea, being an outdoor company, driving Gore-Tex, we could do a lot there. And I moved to Bozeman, Montana, to kind of get it going. It was already going. It started in 2006, but at that point, it's big game primarily. And there's a lot of whitetailers out there. There's a lot of waterfowlers out there. It was, where's the sky? How far can we take it? And that's kind of how I ended up,
And that was in 06 you moved to Montana to do that?
No, 06 is when they founded it.
Okay.
Jonathan and Jason Harrison. And, I would say I moved out there probably in 12.
Really?
Yeah. So, there were some years there where they were driving their course and they had the brand and, before, they built this relationship with Gore. And, but once we got to that point and they were in Napa Valley, California. I don't know how many people knew that, right? They were right there in wine country. And
that's where Sitka was located?
Yeah, that's where Sitka was located originally.
I guess I don't know why I just figured it was in Bozeman all along.
Yeah, well, I mean, and today the lifeblood is in Bozeman. So many, pretty much anything you touch today was some byproduct of a designer or developer or someone in Bozeman, and the materials teams in Bozeman, and it was important for Gore. We not nothing against Napa or the things available there, but we always believed you got to use things, you got to beat them up, you put them through their paces, and we had to find a place that could do that. And you could duck hunt there, you could elk hunt there, you could ski there, you could hike up hills there, you could beat stuff up. So we wanted to be close to something like that.
Yeah.
And so Bozeman became the best choice. It had a university,
right.
So there's academia there, in terms of just creating good product and working with interns and people who were just smart.
Right. Pull that sucker up a little higher and right to you.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, you got to talk right. It's kind of uncomfortably close to talking to that mic.
Yeah.
But Sitka didn't really move to Bozeman until Gore got involved.
That's right. Yeah, we moved it out there just around this commitment to fitness for use and really driving it. And it was the right move at that time.
Yeah.
But that was a part of the history there that was in Napa Valley, California. That's where the original idea came from. And like I said, Jonathan and Jason kind of got it off the ground.
Right. When you started getting involved or becoming friends with Jonathan, that had to have been kind of cool to start like thinking about the idea of involving like a childhood passion with hunting into your actual daily work life. I mean, I wonder what it was kind of like before. Like everything else you were doing for Gore before that really probably wasn't much in the outdoors, right? You said you were doing MRI machine stuff or the engineering side.
Yeah. Kind of closer to that time, I had moved over to the fabrics division, and, I was doing some outdoorsy things,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing like this. Hunting was something I grew up doing, fishing, those kind of things. And, for me to, it's one thing to be part, one component of a great product, but to be part of really bringing it to the consumer, having a direct relationship, was kind of a dream come true,
Yeah.
And so, job one was, hey, let's do better in whitetail. Let's really put our footprint there. And I think that year we launched 75 products.
Holy cow!
Yeah, it was the focus of everything that everyone on the team did. Full commitment, and I didn't have that background. I had the background in terms of a user, and people ask, how do you get in the industry? What do you got to do? Well, it's not easy. It's blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
And lots of times, most of us that wind up here, there's a little luck and there's a lot of commitment and just a lot of hard work. But we launched 70 some products, learned how to manage product lines. I learned how to run a better business, learned how to be more consumer centric. It's just, that's one of the best decisions I ever made personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild thinking about it because, you look at a company like Sitka, and, personally, I don't even really remember when I would think of them as small, right? You just see Sitka and you think of like the number one camo brand in the country, like, and the highest quality and just everything about it is super, super good gear. And I was wearing that long before I ever knew a single soul that, worked at Sitka, or before I was in this industry at all, just a lineman, and became a fan of Sitka. But what you don't really think of is, 06, when they started that, is not that long ago. I mean, we're not talking the 90s or the 80s or 50s.
Right.
I mean, 06 is just like yesterday. I mean, my daughter Demi was 2 years old then. Like, it's crazy how fast they went from being an idea to what it is today.
Yeah. And it's kind of, one of the things that Jonathan used to talk about a lot, and I really appreciate this from him. He was truly an innovator and can see well in front of things. But, he always talked about changing an industry. And you talk about that time, right? And, back in, 2012 or whatever, some of those pieces I started wearing, honestly, you go home with a couple of buddies and they're like, what are you wearing, pajamas?
Yeah.
And, that was such a foreign thing for especially East Coast whitetailers, to think about layering systems and, and moisture management. I mean, people look at you like you had two heads, right?
Well, a lot of people would shit on it even. I kind of remember, because that was really, like, I grew up hunting wearing, like, woolies.
Yep.
Or, God, I remember, I mean, pretty much the whole time growing up, during archery season, you wore cotton, and during rifle season, you wore wool. And that was about it. And I remember kind of more of the old school hunters, like, what are you wearing that, super expensive shit for? Woolies have worked forever. Your T-shirt's fine. You don't need all that. And it's wild how fast those guys all converted to wearing technical gear. But at first they just thought it was about price. And then people started putting it on, and it's like, man, you can move in that stuff, and it weighs like, a quarter of what that other stuff weighs, and it dries. You don't have to build a raging bonfire and sit there for hours for your. It's really wild how much they really did change the industry.
Yeah, it is the notion of changing the industry, right? You change the mindset, and now probably get criticisms of people overthinking it. I see people asking questions like, "What's the best system to go shed hunting? Go find antlers." And people beat on them for that. They're like, what, really? Like, you guys are over-indexing here. You really need that. But people now are taking it way more seriously. And, I think one of the things that you can change an industry, but changing a mindset to recognizing, you don't spend that much time outside at the end of the day. You don't, you think about your time hunting and, even the most devout, 6 days a year, or maybe a little bit past that, what's that worth to you? Comfort, just being out and being present. And, you know, that guy who asked about shed hunting maybe just wants to be present, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. And
Well,
that's a mindset.
there's also the idea with gear that like the longer you can actually be out there, the more sheds you're going to find, right? The
Right.
longer you can stay in the mountains in September, the better chance you're going to probably wake up and all of a sudden a bull's bugling when you hadn't heard one in 3 days. So if wearing gear that makes you comfortable, that keeps you warm or dry or whatever, gives you the option or the ability to stay in those mountains one more day, or manages your scent, and you know, it doesn't get a nasty funk or something like that, you know, that shed hunter's probably going to find more sheds. And I mean, those people take that shed hunting as serious as someone does actual hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just, you know, when you kind of start breaking it down to what is it worth to you, and then that outcome or being there a little longer, it's why people buy better things. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you guys, you kind of making a better knife than people made, or thinking about how you might carry it, or,
Yeah.
you know, it's still that mentality of recognizing that there's parts of your world that are worth a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's worth you spending, you know, the time, not just the money, but the mind space to understand what's important to you, and bringing that into the fold. That is industry changing logic. And, you know, like I said, grow up hunting, you know, cheap things, you know, it was all in one parkas. It was, bottom basement knives, whatever it may be, right? All
For
the whole
sure.
equipment. It was, you don't do it enough, so you don't justify owning the nice things. And
My
now
rain gear was
it's
a
reversed.
garbage sack.
Yeah, exactly.
My mom would send a hefty bag, and it's like, if it starts raining, cut a hole in it and pop your arms through it.
Actually, well, I remember my boots was bread bags.
Yeah. Oh, we did that.
Yeah,
Yep.
bread bags.
Yep.
You know?
Slide your sock, put your foot in there, and slide it in your boot.
Yeah.
And bread sack.
Yeah, why do you
Not
need
real
anything
breathable.
better? Yeah, why do you need anything better? You don't spend a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
They're the most memorable moments you have. Come on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of, I think we're in a generation of times where people understand that now. And it's not a sales pitch. You know, it's you either live it and believe it or you don't. And that's okay if you don't. Right?
You know, and you could look at it kind of in a different way too, from the standpoint of like, there's that book, The Comfort Crisis, and like, let's face it, even those of us out there, the guys that really do hunt hard, you want to be as comfortable as possible too. I mean, it doesn't, just because you're hunting hard or hiking hard or out there for days, doesn't mean you also, that has to equal to misery. You know, you can actually be pretty comfortable out there and be away from your truck for 6 or 7 days, with the right gear. And that includes your pack, your boots, like everything.
Right, exactly. And like I said, you're present.
Yeah.
You know, when you're present in something, you got the good things. You know, we talk about, you know, comfort's one of the things we talk about a lot. Imagine you make gear, you talk about comfort, right? And comfort's really not, it's not a sensation of a thing, right? It's a sensation of lack of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you know, when you take away the cold sensation you have, right? When you take away the cramps that you get, you take away the confined areas, right? Comfort is like when everything else disappears and you're just present.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know, think about that, right? So you're up in a mountain or you're out on an elk hunt, and that memory of it, right? And you spend more time. And,
Yeah. You're
you know,
fully engaged.
fully engaged. Mental acuity's higher. Anyway, I could go on and on, but
Yeah.
I truly believe in it. If you can't tell.
Yeah. No, I know you do. And I actually find stories like Sitka's super inspiring, because like with where we're at today, it's easy to just look at the daunting mountain that we're trying to climb ahead of us, and there's competitors that are ahead of you, or people that you feel like have a big head start, and you're trying to carve out a space, and sometimes it seems daunting, like it's unachievable, because I'm just an average guy with what we're trying to do. I'm just a lineman, average good dude, right? And you look at what like Jonathan and Jason were able to build and where it went, and really, you know, what are we, 2023? So in less than 20 years, say 15 years, and really even less than that, Sitka's been a big deal. So even like, say 10 years in, well, man, if you told me that we could be anywhere close to that in 10 years, I'd be like, well, that's no problem. Like, that's not much time. I mean, that's amazing how fast that they and then you guys were able to take it from there and keep it going. It gives somebody like me a lot of hope of like, why can't we? Why can't we be there in 10 years?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, and you asked a little bit about my background, right? And so, you know, the other side of it was I did leave Sitka for a period of time, and I went to YETI. And at that time, I was managing the cooler business. I worked really close with Roy and Ryan at the time and got to meet a lot of those early folks. And when I look at your operation, things you're doing, the way you're thinking, right? Like that time when I walked into that building, you had to buy a chair or sit on a cooler. That was, they were pretty big, but they weren't what people see today.
Yeah.
And they, there's so many commonalities in that, right? It's good people, understand where they want to be, have a clear line of sight of their vision, it's like, hey, we want to be there for the average guy. We want to build a better thing. We, whatever it may be. Right. And those guys had that same logic, and look at them now. And, these things kind of take that growth. But I've been fortunate to sit at the beginning of now a Sitka and the beginning of now a YETI. And, and I don't know if it's a word of encouragement, but boy, it doesn't feel a lot different to me looking across the table, right? It's still, all the recipes are there, and they're there for other people too. If they truly believe in something, want to drive it. But like I said, you don't just walk into it. You work hard. You understand what matters. You're true to your consumer, right?
Yeah. And honestly, with the knife thing, like I truly, for 20 years was sitting there watching what I thought were, kind of inferior knives being sold to hunters by people and companies that really didn't actually hunt or design their knives to hunt. And also, I actually saw it getting where a mentality developed over that 20-year stretch where people began to throw their knives away instead of passing them down, instead of worrying about, or concerning themselves with learning how to buy a knife that was of a high quality or how to sharpen that knife and maintain it. It was just like became another throwaway item. And that's where, like, I'm kind of on a personal mission to change that narrative, especially for people who hunt. Like, I've sharpened thousands of these knives for people over the last 30 years where people walk into my shop and they're like, this was my grandfather's knife. Can you sharpen it? This was my dad's. He died 10 years ago. It's the only thing I've got from him. I know he carried it everywhere. Can you sharpen it? I want to carry it, or I want to put it in my safe or on my mantle. And we don't think at 30 and 40 years old about, like, you probably think, like, nobody cares about the knife you're using today, right? But in 30 and 40 years or in 50 years when you're dead and gone, there's very good chance there's going to be somebody that's like, this is cool. My grandpa carried this for years on all these hunts when he was working at Sitka, It's not on us to determine what's valuable to the next generation. It's on them, know. And
absolutely.
to just throw that away takes that opportunity for them to value something that they would,
Yeah, and you're hitting on something too, Josh. I think there's absolutely the heirloom side of it, but real time dealing with this. We live in a throwaway culture. It's not whether it's a knife, a garment, plastic bottles, whatever, right? And we, and it's, God bless the industry who makes that a big deal and tries to make it better, right? But sometimes it's for profit, sometimes it's for purpose. But at the end of the day, that's a problem, right? We live in a throwaway culture, and start recognizing that you're making gear, right? You're making a tool. You're making something that may be a lifetime is how you decide to measure it. Is it the lifetime I own it? Is it the lifetime I own it plus another person? Maybe it's my son. What's a lifetime? And and then as you're designing a product and you start owning that responsibility, what commitment am I making? Am I making a commitment to the guy who puts the Benjamins on the table? Am I making a commitment to 2 generations after that? Right.
Right.
And I think if you kind of say, well, we live in a throwaway culture, that's a problem. Let me change the way people think and make something that's supposed to be, treasured, an heirloom, but all up to the task, right?
Right.
There's crazy statistics on the stuff goes in landfills, and the apparel industry, because I sit on that side, we're one of the worst offenders.
Yeah.
We know it, and we're not hiding. Fashion for Good and all kinds of other organizations working to make it better, and we're trying to be part of that movement. But I think even from where you guys are, that narrative and how you think, and you pay a little more. Right? Consumers need to think that way too, right? Like, I pay more because I expect more, right? And we deliver on that, right?
I still have the first Optifade pair of pants that I ever bought. And maybe somebody will tell me I need to hunt harder, but I think they only have one little tiny hole in them. And honestly, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here as far as like a Sitka Gear person. I've told people, like, it's unbelievable how what was wild about Sitka's stuff when it came out was how thin it was, but then how long it actually lasted. That was because you thought, like, to your point, like, oh, what are you wearing, pajamas? Those things are going to have a hole in them in the first hunt. And all of a sudden it's like people were going year after year, and then they were adding pieces to that collection. Like, wow, those pants held up. I'm going to go ahead and spend the money on a jacket. And I do think the price point does generally make people a little more respectful of their gear. You know, you're going to take less chance to, if you're drying it out, to burn it next to the fire. Right. Or, you know, you're going to take a little more care to put that knife in the sheath and not just leave it on the mountain or lose it. And I think having the price point be kind of where Sitka stuff is, or ours, or some of the other people out there, you know, a Kafaru pack.
Right.
People are going to care for that. They're going to clean that gear. They're not going to, you know, wash it with a bunch of jeans and a bunch of nasty detergent. Like, they're going to take more care. And yes, probably your Sitka pants aren't going to last your entire life if you hunt fairly hard. But to your point, you're going to get a lifetime out of those, meaning every dollar you spent, you're going to get what you expected to get out of that. And you're going to go, that $250 was like, ended up being worth it.
Right.
Because I would have bought a $40 pair every year.
Yep. And it is a mindset, right? It's coveting and cherishing. And lots of times when you spend a little bit more, because you're getting more. So that's an important part, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you think, you know, we use rifles as an analogy, right? You know, you'll oil your rifle every time you come in. You'll clean it off. You'll make sure you don't get pitting and no rusting or any of those things. It's because you covered it. You cherish it. You see it as a piece of gear. And I think the original sentiment, turning clothing into gear, was founded in that idea, right? That if it's gear, you treat it like gear. You take care of it. And I know you guys do resharpening, and you know, you do a lot, you know, for your customers if they have an issue, or making sure that it's still their primary choice, right? If I have 5 knives, why do I always grab my MKC, right? Because A, it does the job. B, I think it does it better. And C, I think it's going to last.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to put it through its paces, right? And, you know, it's a mindset. And I'm glad to see, I think it's you know, through time, generations all carry their own torch. And it feels like this one's starting to carry that one, right?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And you know, that also, that standing behind the product, like we had a guy emailing yesterday and asked how much we'd charge to rewrap his speed goat because it was starting to get, the cord was getting nasty. And Jess responds back and says, that's free. That's part of the warranty. Like, just send it in. We'll rewrap it. And when we have it, we'll clean it and resharpen it. And we've gotten knives in that we literally have to just put in boiling hot water because they just come in caked in fat, like not cleaned off. But, and honestly, a couple of our people were like a little irritated at first. They were like, you know, why can't they clean their knife on sand? I'm like, I don't care if they clean their knife or not. Like, we can do that. We can clean them up, get them as clean as we can. We'll rewrap them. But that guy couldn't believe that we weren't charging for that. And it's like, well, but you paid a good price for that knife in the very beginning. And if we do that, eventually that guy's going to come back and he's going to buy another knife for his friend or his son or his wife or whatever. And I'm a big believer in, you stand behind that stuff, you'll end up getting paid back in the end.
Absolutely. Well, and so what happens if you didn't do it, right? Like, so play that forward. Well, you know, maybe he's okay with it. He didn't expect it. He's surprised you did it. But does it just join a collection of all the other things he's not using?
Right.
Who has that? I have so much of that stuff. We all do. We have these huge piles of things that we don't really use because they aren't valuable anymore. And he goes and buys something else, right?
Yeah.
That's the wrong idea. That is a throwaway culture. Right?
And it does look cool when you have your blade that's maybe got a little bit of rust or maybe got a little bit, you can tell it's used, it's scratched up, but then all of a sudden it has a brand new paracord handle on it. And it's like, you've got a new knife again. That guy's excited to use it. The edge is brand new. And that gets that person to just start putting those memories into that product, into that knife, where now when he passes that thing down, that's a knife maybe he has had for 12 years and gone on 12 cool hunts or something. I think it's really important, especially for a brand like ours with something you really truly are going to pass down, that we stand behind it.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. And you know, what does it start meaning to people? I mean, I have one of your speed goats 2 years ago, my son shot an elk. I was with him. We caped the entire thing out, quartered it, did everything with that one knife. And that's not a, hey, yeah, it's a little bit of a testimony, but I don't mean it to be. But what came with that knife was, yes, a bunch of meat and sacks. Yes, a caped animal, but a memory. And it's something I still have. And one day my son will have it, and that's, I think I think it speaks to the point you're making, right? We all, sometimes we get hung up on the wrong things.
Yeah.
And what we should care most about is, the value of things, what we do in this world that we live in, enjoying the moments we have and being present, right? And not being full of issues and problems because we didn't care enough.
Not to be morbid, but like today, I'm sure that hunt means quite a bit to your son. I'm sure he thinks it's kind of cool. Probably thinks the knife's fine. But down the road, when you're gone, all of a sudden the only thing that's tangibly going to be left from that hunt is that knife.
That's
and
right.
that knife's going to mean way more to him down the road. And as we get older and we have kids, we tend to be more nostalgic now. So like we might already think like, wow, that's cool. I use that knife with my son. And he's like, yeah, that was a cool hunt. Whatever. Off to the next hunt, right?
Yeah.
But down the road, he's going to be 50 years old, and he's going to be looking back and going, man, like the memories start coming back of like, I remember using that blade with my dad. Like that was super cool. Like I didn't appreciate it like I do now,
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why these guys walk into my shop. And it's never about the knife. Like I've always told people that our knives are purposely not like overly fancy.
Mm-hmm.
They're just kind of like that working knife deal. And the point is I've had only a couple times somebody come into my shop with a knife that I would consider like a collectible, like the knife's worth a lot more money today because of who made it than it was back then. Almost all the time, it's just a regular old buck knife or a regular old timer or a Leatherman. The value is always in who owned it, and so that's to me where you build the value into. It's the same thing with a gun, like with a rifle. Yeah. Like I remember my grandpa carrying that rifle, or that rifle was in the Civil War or something like that. It's cool. So back to being a kid. What did your parents do growing up?
Yeah. So it's funny, it's kind of a single mom situation for a big part of my childhood till about 10, which doesn't always equal a lot of hunting and fishing,
Yeah.
So that beginning part of my life, my mom worked at General Motors. She worked a pretty manual job, working class, raising two kids, and then, my stepdad, who's really my father now, he was pest control guy, right? Like working class, basic guy, right? But I kind of think me and him learned to hunt together.
Really?
Yeah, because he didn't have that as a kid either. Little rougher childhood, so I'm letting it all on the table, right? But
Yeah.
he was learning too, and so we learned together. And I think that because he recognized he was learning, he was committed to it.
Yeah.
And so
And that was probably a cool way for him to, my wife's a stepmom. So there's always that, like, how do you connect to the step kids?
Yeah.
How do you get that kid to accept you and fill that role as a dad? But then it's like hard. You're not trying to step on toes and all that. But that to me, if I was in that situation, would seem like an amazing and fun way to gain a relationship with a young boy that might otherwise be a little bit hard. Is doing things together in the field like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember, I'd have the boat, life jackets in the boat, oars on the boat, motor set up, ready to go when he'd get home so we could, get that last 2 hours on the river right before fishing or, whatever it was, right? And so, it became the thing that connects you. And, even with my own son, I learned that today. He's 22 and, we still hunt together. Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing we do.
And those are probably some of your, I would imagine, those are probably your best memories as a child, are those hunting memories. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a big part. Honestly, you think, gosh, everybody's got their own moment and story, but they're the things I do remember, in general, right? Good memories aside, they're the things you kind of do hold on to and you remember, right? And it's funny, we were talking about gear, I did a room in my basement and, it's kind of a conservation kind of theme thing. It's kind of something I think is important. and I had my first bow and my first gun on the wall. Right?
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. It's actually kind of more rare for people to have their first bow.
Yeah.
You know, bows tend to seem to be something we kind of like get rid of because the next model comes along. But with guns, you never do that. It's weird.
Yeah, I kept it. It's a Hoyt Rambo Jr. You know, and it kind of, I don't know if anybody can look that up, but you know, it kind of ages me a bit. But it's, you know, I still have that thing because it's how I learned.
Yeah, I remember I had a PSE Thunderflight, and I remember those old aluminum arrows, whatever they were, like the 2317s or something. And
Right.
when I was shooting at like 50 yards, I was dropping bombs. Dropping like at 50 yards, you know, like today we're at TAC and we're shooting 100, 110 yards. And I remember like shooting at 20 and 30 and be like, I'm going to step back to 50. I'm going to do something crazy.
I'm going big. Yeah, those things were lobbing. I mean, gosh, I've watched the whole industry kind of, you know, there's been all the little gadgets, right? There was string you could hook to your arrow, and it would, you know, so it was kind of like you could track your deer, but it was pulling your arrow down, and, you know, all the little gimmicky things through the years, right? But yeah, back then, you know, they weren't exactly setting the world on fire. The cams were the size of a quarter. Right?
Yeah.
They weren't huge.
Does that look like one of them up there?
Yeah, I think that.
Look at the cam. Look at the cam.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. See how small the cams are?
Yeah.
Yep. That next one over. Yeah. That right beside it. I think there's that Rambo compound Hoyt. Yeah, something like that. Right. And, yeah,
it looks like a cross between a long bow and a compound bow.
Yeah, look at those little cams, right? Now the cams are gigantic, right?
Yeah, and the limbs now are level with each other.
Yeah.
Basically, and look at those limbs, they're sticking straight up.
Yeah, right? I mean, it's funny how so much has changed. And gosh, I remember pendulums. I don't know, like used to have this you know, basically as you angled your bow down from a tree stand, the sight would just kind of move on a pivot, and you just counterbalanced it to where it was like the right arc.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? Like, who does that, right? It was the whole thing. You know, this is all, it's crazy how much has changed through the years.
I remember getting my, I got a Bowtech, I think on Allegiance, probably in like 03 or 4. And I had my Thunder Flight for several years, and people were shooting, it was like these new style compounds. And I remember going to my buddy's house. I hadn't been around a new bow in years. And went to his house, and we were shooting bows, and I lobbed my Easton aluminum arrow out there, and all of a sudden he shoots this like laser beam out of that bow, and I immediately was like, I gotta have one of these. And I thought at that point when I bought that new Bowtech bow that this is it, like this is as fast as a bow can ever get, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing from there to today, like that technology, you know, how it's just come along. You product guys at these companies.
You're right.
It's amazing how you can keep finding ideas.
Yeah.
And I wonder a little bit about that from, like, with what you do. I look at a company like Sitka, and I'm like, God, what could you possibly do more? Like, the gear's so good. There's so much of it. Like, all these lines are built out. We talked today about, like, it's actually what's exciting about MKC is there's no shortage of ideas. It's actually more of trying to focus, like, where do we put our energy, right? Because we could go anywhere and everywhere, but at a company like Sitka, as a product guy, how do you come up with ideas? Do you listen to the customers? Is it more material based?
Gosh, I mean, it's a long answer in some ways, but I mean, I think the primary thing is you listen to customers. You know, you find a problem to solve. I think that's the beginning of every genesis, right? Is what is a pain point, and do you have a pain point? What are the things? And it's so funny how many of those things are things that you've just gotten used to dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's, you know, it's something we all knew needed to be done. You just kind of wrote it off as a standard, right? Thinking about the Fanatic and the focus on the hands and, you know, flip mitts and face masks. God, when we put that face mask in the Fanatic, nobody had ever done that, right? Like, honestly, think about it. Go do some, like, all mainstream brands do it today. And at that time, gosh, it was common logic to believe that you were going to impact hearing, and you couldn't do that well. And, you know, but there was a problem to solve, you know, around concealment and you know, and just, you know, even the thermal side, or even the flip mitts and keeping your hands warm, right? So I think we've always done that deep dive, all right, on problems to solve. And typically we do it with masters. We have a lot of people who are really core users. Most you'll never meet. You know,
Yeah.
if I'm being honest, it's a lot of really hardcore guys that, you know, they don't fly their flag every day, but they were a big part of why we are where we are. So that's one half. Yeah, you have the big problem to solve. And then sometimes, you know, because we are tied to Gore, a materials innovation company, sometimes things become possible because of innovation. Like,
Yeah.
you know, a new material that never existed, you know, aerogels is an example, right? We did our Aerolite launch. NASA helped invent some of those things, but sometimes things come because the world evolves. And when they come, recognizing that those are very impactful to your consumer and being the one who connects the dots. So sometimes it's a little bit of that. It's a tech push, things that come to be, you recognize the value that that would have and you plug it in. The other side, I have a problem to solve. People don't, you know, that these are issues that they have and I want to try to address them for them. So it's a culmination of both.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a wild thing for me to think about. And it seems like it's a daunting challenge to come up with. And I can't imagine, you know, I see on our side, just the idea of making like a folding knife and the things to go in, like, well, now you got to start sourcing those screws and making those parts and figuring out where to do it, you know. And, you know, one question, you know, that kind of comes around to is like having where things are made and whatnot. And, you know, we pride ourselves obviously on, you know, making stuff here in America. And I'm sure you'd probably agree, everybody would just love ideally to see stuff made in America.
Right.
But the thing I hear over and over, and I see some other companies, I see, you know, companies like Origin trying to do it. I've seen some other companies try to do it, but it seems like such a daunting task for any company to do it in a real grand, huge scale of making stuff. It seems like the fabric world, and I'm not even talking from a labor perspective, it seems like the technology and the fabrics, you know, taking the labor portion of it out of just the cost of making it, seems like the fabrics world lives in that, you know, Asian area. Talk about that, what that's like, and like why is it that Americans can't seem to get the fabric situation where we're like leading the world, where we do seem to lead the world in some of the other things that we do.
Yeah, you know, it is one you get a lot, right? And because I sometimes tell people you got to fish where the fish are, right? And you got to think about like to do that, there has to be options for you to be able to bounty, right? And when I don't mean financially, right? I mean create great products.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you look at the, you know, the history of the U.S., I mean, there's a place in New York called Gloversville. They made gloves. They were, you know, they were the kind of town that prided themselves in U.S. manufacturing, and they did a great job of it for a really long time, right? And I would say that if I could go back in time to a period like that, there was, you know, there was people who understood it. They knew how to do it. There was skilled folks who knew how to make it. And there were supply chains that were able to supply to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so everything takes time, right? And so over a period of time from there to now, where that wasn't a priority for really the U.S., right? Most major manufacturers, you know, and the consumers need had a, you know, a lot to do with price point and other things. The skilled laborers, the machines necessary, it's a lot of equipment. It's a lot of things to skill up, right? You know, you got to take a small fiber and you got to knit it, and there's wovens, and there's just so many processing steps, right? And that stuff's expensive,
Yeah.
right? It takes a lot of years to build that kind of capability.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you use a muscle, you build a muscle. If you don't use a muscle weakens. And we just hadn't used the muscle for a very long time as a country. And, you know, and I really think the world of the companies now who are helping stimulate that muscle, making that muscle stronger, it's something we all believe in. We all want to see happen. And I think, you know, between the muscle that they're helping build, you know, changes in legislation, duty, cost of manufacturing, everything's cyclical. Everything's cyclical.
And I hate to say it, because as hunters, I don't like the term environmentalist, because I generally think that most of us as hunters are environmentalists of really the purest and the best form.
Agree.
Because we absolutely care about our environment, the habitat the animals live in, and quite frankly, we as hunters put more money than most environmentalists do as individuals into conservation and in the environment. But definitely the environmental ramifications that we are subject to in our country, you know, I look at it, spinning it away from like Gore or Sitka, but into like the steel manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Pennsylvania, was the steel place, right? And yes, they still make some steel in Pennsylvania and New York, but man, the amount of different alloys and the different steels that used to be available, and now with those being in Austria and Switzerland and Germany and places like that, and frankly, the cost today to maintain a facility, or quite frankly, God forbid, to build a new one, like to just start a manufacturing plant of steel. And I'm starting a knife company. I can't even imagine how you would try to start a brand new steel making facility and the environmental regulations. And as we'll agree, I'm sure there's a lot of those that are good regulations, and you kind of wish the rest of the world had them, but also by us holding ourselves to a certain standard, we also close a lot of doors that just, because frankly, the consumer does vote with their wallet in the end.
That's right.
And we all, and I'm as guilty as anybody, we all say we want to buy everything American made. Mm-hmm. But we all have our limit too with our wallet, and that might depend on, you with your job might be able to, buy something American made that the guy that's making $20 or $15 an hour as a framer with 3 young kids, like he might have the same set of values, but he has to choose the cheaper product at Walmart.
Right. That's right.
I mean, that might be why he's not wearing Sitka, quite frankly, because he might not be able to afford the stuff yet.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that metal, that steel industry of Pittsburgh is a real example of an in-kind situation in the apparel industry and the fabrics industry. And there's areas where it's evolving. And most people may not know this. We make a lot of the materials that do go into Sitka products. Not all of them, but some of them are made in Elkton, Maryland.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah, they're laminated and put together in Elkton, Maryland, right? And so there's part of that. Gore has a pretty a real presence in our military's apparel world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that requires Berry compliancy and U.S. supply chains. So we have a footprint in some of those areas, and there's areas where we know it's evolved and developed. But like you said, there's a lot of implications, and as that muscle gets stronger, it becomes more tangible. And I think that does come. Like I said, it's cyclical. Over time, it will come. But for right now, we all are doing the best we can with the situation we're in, and we make sure we have. First, you make sure you have the best possible product.
Yeah.
Right. And that's important too.
Yeah. And frankly, for us, one of my bigger worries about us scaling down the road, and I see some of the big companies out there that have 400 or 500, 600 employees at a minimum, is the area that we live in, particularly here, is really quite small. And you start looking at the workforce, and then you start looking at the competition for that workforce that's actually willing to work. It's not the workforce. It should be called the willing workforce, because the willing workforce is a lot different than the actual workforce, of which are half are unwilling. And it's a bit of a concern. And then you start looking, well, where would we have to make knives to be able to say have 1,000 employees, right? Well, you got to be around a large metropolitan area. Well, guess what that area brings? Very, very high prices with very little space available to build, say, 100,000 square foot manufacturing facility. And so it's really a challenge. Is like, I know for us, I'm already thinking about how we grow and expand. In just a year, we went from 2 to 15 employees. Well, if we keep scaling like that and we go from 15 to 45 and 45 to 150, all of a sudden, like, those problems become real in a hurry. And so again, some of these countries actually have the workforce as well. That's the willing workforce.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I was talking to my wife. It's everyone's looking for help. I don't know what happened, because people didn't leave the planet, right? Like there's all these jobs have opened up. I don't know if people found another way to make money.
And robots actually came in. Like, not only did we not leave the planet, we've actually implemented as industries the ability to make more stuff with less people. So you would actually think, because I remember when robots were coming around, say 10 years ago, everybody was like, oh, that no one's ever going to be able to find a job. Like, you're going to replace everybody with technology and a computer and a robot. And all I hear everywhere I go is, we can't find humans
right
that want to work.
Yeah.
It's wild. And I think we're spoiled in our country. We've created and this goes down a political rabbit hole we don't need to go down, but we've definitely created an environment in which you don't have to work. And a lot of those countries aren't as fortunate as ours, where they do have to go work in a sew shop every day, all day.
Yeah, there's no backup plan, right?
Right.
Like, yeah, if you can't, for some reason you can't provide, nothing's provided, right?
Right.
And I think our country tries to find ways that doesn't happen. And the good side is we try to take care of people. The bad side is not everybody's as hardworking as others, right?
Yeah.
And that's it definitely goes down a political rabbit hole. But at the end of the day, these are the kinds of challenges I think you led the conversation with, right? Like, so, U.S. manufactured products. What if you could step in the head of the brands and how they make those decisions? These are the things you're dealing with, right? You're dealing with labor considerations, duty considerations, available capacity of key equipment to make things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Know-how, just pure American know-how, right? It's just it's a muscle, like I said, cyclical. It'll have to come back, and that's the challenge, right? And that's it's the compromises and the things we all wrestle with. We don't all get the luxury of living just on a principle, right?
Right.
We have to find a way to still provide great things for people.
Right. Now, you said you went to school for, did you say industrial engineering?
Electrical engineering.
Electrical engineering. What, graduating high school, where did you, is that what you went straight into?
Yeah, so I started in vocational school. So I started kind of doing just electronics technician stuff, right? And did that in high school, right? So it was, early on. And
so those electronics just kind of tripped your trigger a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I was always, I don't know. It's geeky in some ways, right? But it was always honest. I don't know how else to describe it, right? Like, it was math. It was honest. It is what it is.
Yeah, electricity definitely.
It's honest.
You can't bullshit it.
You can't bullshit it. It's honest. And, as much as people think that there's hocus pocus or, this doesn't make sense, it always does.
And
right?
When I was a lineman, when we had shit happen at work that we didn't understand, like things would just go haywire and we'd have a ball of fire or some reason something didn't work or things were wild. At a certain point, we would ask the engineers at work, like, what is happening here? Like, electrically, why is this happening? And at a certain point, it inevitably finally got to the point where they would just say it was FM, which at work, that was fucking magic.
Right.
You're like, we don't know. It's just FM. Because electricity, when you start going down the electricity theory and you start getting into, like, our big boss at work, Gary, he's kind of a weirdo, and he's definitely strange. And not necessarily a great leader of people, but he is one freaking smart dude.
Yeah.
Like, on the electrical side, we as linemen would go to that guy and be like, what is happening? He'd start drawing all the diagrams and be like, we're just going to call it FM.
And that's the stuff I always liked because it was a challenge, right? And it was, I don't know, you had to understand circuit. Anyway, that could go down another rabbit hole on that, but I always enjoyed that. I'll just say I always enjoyed that, and kind of got into it more. And then started studying electrical engineering. In the military, biomedical engineering isn't a fully degreed thing in the beginning. So that MASH thing, so we'd put up a hospital, and, that included HVAC. That included primary wiring and generator repair. But it also included X-rays equipment. And
that's what you did in the Air Force, you said?
Yep. And, ventilators and all that stuff, right?
That's the part of the military a lot of people, I think, completely, like, it's amazing how many linemen I've met that were linemen in the military.
Yeah.
People don't realize, like, you always think of the military as like the Army Ranger or the Navy SEAL and the dude saving his buddy in combat or something. But the amount of people in a support role,
huge,
from building a base, building out infrastructure, doing whatever, supporting logistics. I mean, it dwarfs the amount of people that are packing a gun around and actually fighting. It's really incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean, my time, I did 6 years active, and then 4 years active, 6 reserve, because I just couldn't part with it at one point. That's most of who I saw, if I'm being honest, right? It took a lot to make it happen.
Yeah.
And there was definitely some extraction stuff and different kinds of things that happen as part of that. But there's so many.
Did you deploy
on some areas? Yeah. So I spent some time. We brought people back and forth between Ramstein Air Base and theater. So it was an interesting part of my life. But so spent some time doing that, and then eventually went on to finish all my studies and time at Gore, and then
Was Gore straight out of college then?
Yeah. So it was straight out, and kind of it was a business that had already existed, but, it's kind of where I cut my chops in medical device design, right?
Yeah.
Which is inevitably couldn't be further from Sitka Gear
Yeah.
and coolers, for Christ's sake, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just sometimes people ask how do you get in the industry. I'm a case study, and sometimes stuff happens, right?
So maybe you need to be the guy involved in helping design all the battery pack heated gear and all the electrical stuff where you don't get cooked in the rain or something like
oh
that.
yeah, find a problem, fix it. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Well, that's wild. So with YETI, I think that's like two of the biggest names that I can really think of and I don't know why I really consider YETI in the outdoor industry, because I mean it's a cooler company, but I still really consider them an outdoor brand.
Yeah,
maybe that was their branding early on that did that, but it's wild to me that you had such an early part. I mean, really, let's just face it. You're the reason for success in Sitka and YETI. Like, you just built the companies.
No, I that couldn't be further from the
I
truth.
think that's what I'm going to do for an intro of this podcast.
I think I met I got lucky and met some pretty amazing people along the way who made a lot of awesome things happen.
Well, there's definitely luck. I mean, luck's involved, I think, in a lot of, like, I was super lucky to be playing Little League Baseball in Lincoln, Montana, and have a knife maker invite me to a shop, right? Like, that's luck. But what wasn't lucky was that at 11 years old, I think I was a good kid, and he wanted to invite me up there and let me come. I wasn't like a little bastard, right? So there's definitely luck. But I'm a huge believer in you manifesting, kind of your own destiny or making your own luck. I mean, there's luck, but there's also a reason that they hired you. There's a reason they put you in positions, and then you've been there for how many years now? Like a Gore?
Yeah, over 20 at Gore, and then collectively at Sitka, I don't know, 8 years, 7, 8 years.
Yeah, so I don't think I'd say it's probably no harder space to stay in as a long career than like the executive level of big companies. I mean, you struggle for just a little bit, and they decide to take a new path and send executives down the road. So for the fact that you were able to stay with those companies for that long, and leave Gore and then be welcomed back is like a testament to you, where they didn't feel like they were either happy to get rid of you or didn't want you back, or
Yeah, right. One way or the other, they opened the door back up, right? So which was kind of a blessing, right? It was something I worked. I guess when I left and went to YETI at one point, I kind of alluded that in the beginning I didn't come from the outdoor industry. I didn't come from product development, design at a consumer goods level, right? Different kind of thing. And and a good friend had left Sitka and gone to YETI, and kind of brought the opportunity, and honestly, it was to backfill for Roy, the founder of YETI, right?
Oh, really?
Managing the hard cooler business, and they'd been looking for a year, and
that's a lot of pressure.
Well, big shoes to fill, and certainly I didn't fill them by myself. There was already some people helping in that capacity, but it was. But I looked at it as an opportunity to learn the other side that I didn't get. Right, I understood innovation, understood how to develop products, how to solve problems. But gosh, they made a cooler awesome, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure, they solve some problems, but they also understood how to hit a nerve and how to make people care, and that was a very important lesson. How to be in every household in North America, right? Like, come on, that's a different kind of feat.
I really think they were. I've for a few years now, I've told a lot of people, like, we are trying to actually somewhat compare ourselves a little bit, or want to compare ourselves to YETI from the standpoint that we say, like, we want to be the YETI of the hunting knife category, right? Which means it doesn't matter what camo you wear. It doesn't matter what kind of game you hunt, or if you carry a bow or a rifle. We just want you to have a knife, and we want you to care about really good gear and make it an essential part of your gear. And YETI did an amazing job of, like, if you take yourself back 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and you'd have just said to somebody, I'm going to start making coolers, people would be like, okay, why?
Yeah,
right. Like, a cooler's a cooler, right? Yeah. Like, there's lots of coolers out there. I don't understand. Not only am I going to start making coolers, but I'm going to make coolers, and they're going to become like almost a status symbol. And like, people are going to be like buying coolers even if they can't afford them, because they want to look cool, to their buddies. And like, it's wild. And then not only that, but then people are going to start buying coolers of all different sizes for special events, of which, like, let's face it, do they really need a Yeti to go to their buddy's house to take a 6-pack in for dinner?
Right.
But they're going to buy a very expensive cooler to do that. And
yeah, or a version of every color. And you know, and the funny part, I think, you know, you guys have some synergies, and I'll explain them in a second, right? But they you know, you talked about them being are they an outdoor company? You know, there's a lot of stories that I don't think anybody's ever really put together. And you know, Roy and Ryan grew up in a house with a father who made parts for fishing rods, right? And then Ryan had started this Waterloo rods, right? And so they were in the fishing industry. Roy was wanting to build a boat. Like, he didn't want to build a cooler, he wanted to build a boat. And you know, but part of that boat, a flat skiff boat, was gonna be a cooler on the front you could stand on, right? It was part of an idea.
Yeah.
You know, and that idea probably ended up being different than he thought it was going to be. But in the beginning, he was trying to build. You know, you ever saw the picture of, you know, somebody standing on a broken cooler?
Right.
Right. That's where it started.
Yeah. Smashed in
cooler. Right. And you know,
I'll name the brand Coleman.
Yeah, that's where it all came from. You know, and I don't think in a million years they thought it would grow to where it is. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But you know, it is what happened. Right. It was lightning in a bottle. But I also remember, you know, that happened so fast and they scaled so fast, they ran out of product all the time.
Get you some more Devil's Brigade here.
Oh yeah, thanks. But they ran out of product all the time. You know, there's growing pains. It's really hard to, you know, if you're doing something right and people notice you're doing something right, a lot of people want that thing you're doing right.
Yeah.
And gosh, they had supply chain turmoil. Right.
Really?
Like, oh gosh, like when their original Tundra launches and how many products they didn't have, and you know, just trying to sustain products in the barn, because they always caught it in the barn.
Did they go immediate to like to wholesale, to retail stuff?
Yeah, they did because they you know, and I think part of it for them is if you go into a fishing shop, and not to go too deep, right? Cooler's pretty daggone big, right?
Yeah.
You know, and if you were selling a $75 igloo, you weren't making a lot of money in that big space you were filling. Well, because they were making a better product and it was a heck of a lot more than $75, you know, you were able to generate a lot of money on that. So they were able to get every fishing shop in Texas.
Yep.
You know.
Well, and it's also harder to ship a cooler. It's easier for somebody to just be like, oh, I want that, and pick it up and carry it to their truck. And distribution-wise, I mean, it's easy to ship a knife.
Yeah, but big coolers are a whole nother
Especially
thing.
Yetis Yetis are heavy.
Oh,
you know,
gigantic. So, yeah. But I know you guys, you know, you guys are scaling and you're doing a lot of things right, and people, you know, want to be part of that, and you guys are constantly trying to keep up with those demands. They had the same problems. You know, it's growing, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some synergy there.
So when you walked in the first day at Yeti, what did they task you with, or what was your goal to try? Was it to try and create more products, help them deal with the products they were already making?
Oh boy, it was gosh, I don't know the official and unofficial side, right? So like I said, they were still doing really well. The barred cooler industry is fairly well established, but they also, you know, they were going to go to a point where they were going to go public, right? And so that had to multiply that business by 5-fold.
Yeah.
You know, to get to that place. So, you know, it was both realizing that, you know, we have a great thing here, but what are the great add-ons that have to come? How do we manage it more appropriately so that people get the things they're asking for? What are the things they're asking for we're not really doing for them yet, right? And so it was keeping the lights on, right? Like, I certainly didn't decide I wanted to build a boat and come up with standing on a cooler. I'd be a hell of a lot richer than sitting in this room right now. Right? But I was really tasked with trying to, you know, manage that product, right?
And you were kind of a product manager or product developer?
Category. So, yeah, the hard cooler category. And then went on to kind of help manage bags and, you know, and apparel and some of the growth areas, you know, the Go Box and all those other things were things that, you know, I worked on before I left, which was this idea that, boy, you make some durable, awesome stuff, but what else could it be?
Right.
Yeah.
Start expanding, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, I
buckets.
see all that. Buckets.
Buckets, yeah.
Yeah. I see all that coming down the road for us. It's wild because, like, I sit around and I think a lot, and I think about, like, what MKC could be, but you have to do all the work first to get there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you want to be all things. And I know Brandon and I talk about it. He's better at probably reining me in than, if it was up to me, I'd probably scatter all over the place and not have a lot of direction, because there's all these things you want to do, right? And you want to sell apparel, and you want to make this, and it's like, well, we could make that. And then somebody comes to us with an idea. I've had that happening, where it's like, hey, can you guys manufacture this idea?
Yeah.
And right at first you're like, wow, that's really cool. And then it's like, well, if we were going to do that right, we would have to develop and devote all the time and energy to that we already are to knives, and we don't have enough time for making knives,
Right.
Like, we're still trying to build out our team to just make what we need to make today. And so it's, I imagine they were in that same process back then of just trying to prioritize. And
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at that time, the brand was starting to light on fire, right? And so, you could put that brand on a lot of things and find some short-term gain, right? And I think, I talked earlier about the throwaway culture. That idea lived there too, right?
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, you made a bucket, but boy, it was obscene. Like, it was literally the most overbuilt bucket in the world, or whatever it may be, bottle openers but one thing I can tell you is, I bet you don't find a big pile of YETI products in the garbage.
100%.
Right. And so they
I've actually still never seen one break. Like, honestly, never seen a lid come off one.
No, and there's testimonies of them, cars flipping on them, holding them up, and surviving fires. Of course, the outside's going to melt, right? The rotomolding stuff's going to do that to a degree, but they're still in one piece, right? Or fixing a latch, or
the rubber
whatever.
latches are.
They're
how
replaceable.
many plastic latches would break off of a Coleman cooler after a year? I mean,
Totally.
Especially in the cold,
Yep.
Out ice fishing or something like that. I mean, things broke all the time.
Yeah, and they were replaceable, and so when all those opportunities came up, it was still understand that you got to make the best possible product. And one of the genius parts of, I think, what was going on there at the time is they celebrated products that had become dumbed down to their smallest common denominator, and trying to rise them back up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an idea on its own.
Yeah.
And that debunks that throwaway culture idea too, or, like we said, the value of a knife that you decide to keep for life, or pass down, or the garment that you decide is, it's really expensive, but I probably will use this the rest of my waterfowl career, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
But that deciding what to work on, what not to work on, but doing it through a lens of values, that's that's leadership, that's vision, that's the things that are important in a company.
Yeah. Now you work at Sitka. You guys have another friend of ours, John Barklow.
Yeah.
So John is he on the big game side? Is that?
Yeah. So John, my gosh, John's responsible for just so many of the great products we make. But yeah, he back when John first came and we started working together, he was managing the big game line exclusively as a core user, and has a really awesome, amazing military background that makes him kind of one of the best in the world at it. But he's gone on to continue to add value in all of our categories. So I'd say, John today, I'd say he lifts the tide in all things we do. Right?
He sure does. I mean, it's on his Instagram and stuff, he'll go through and he'll do educational videos on preparing a gear list for sleeping outside, or dealing with rain, or starting fires and all this different stuff. And then he really goes through, like, with the Sitka stuff. And he's really not, the thing about John's videos is he's not doing it to try to sell Sitka gear.
No.
Like, he's truly doing it to help a hunter have a better experience. And then he'll list within the stuff he's doing. Sitka's just a small part of the overall, like, video that he's doing about all your gear, from your boots to your knife to your Sitka. But for people that haven't seen that, is it Knowledge from Storms, I think?
Yeah.
John was a Navy SEAL and a cold weather. Did the cold weather instruction, right, in Alaska for the SEALs.
For the SEALs, yeah.
Those SEALs would cycle through as teams and go through John's training in Alaska. And man, nobody experienced more shitty cold weather and being wet and how to deal with the elements than John over those years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you said it. Like, I promise you, we don't issue John a check for every time he sells Sitka gear. He does what he does, and I truly believe this to be true, because he's taken a lifetime understanding problems to solve. We said that earlier, right? And he just tries to apply those learnings to the things that he helps create, right? And it's often when you're trying to educate, well, that's how you're going to describe it, right? Because that's the thing that's doing what you want, right? But, looking back at time, just things like the rewarming drills and things, contrary to popular demand, the first brand that ever really showed that stuff was Sitka. And we did it because it was something John understood and knew, right?
Yeah.
It was this idea of you fall in the water, you get completely saturated. How do you survive, right? And acknowledging that all products can't do that, and there's characteristics you have to ingrain in the materials to get to that, right? And I just use that as an example for John, right? But, he's brought a ton of knowledge to our products, to our
Credibility.
Credibility out the wazoo.
It's
right?
interesting. I look at giant brands, right? Huge brands. And usually what they lose over time is they tend to lose like some credibility because they lose the face of credibility. Like it's easy for a small brand like ours to be like, oh, well, we have Josh because he's one of 15 people here and he's actively involved, right?
Yeah.
Like I am. But with a huge brand, it's easy over time to have that get diluted. Maybe the owners that started had that credibility move on. They become wealthy and they kind of turn it over to their teams. And what Sitka has done, because what I see large corporations do generally is just replace the credibility people with influencers. And influencers can have credibility, but a lot of them also, like, there's a lot of influencers out there that are full of shit, and a lot of legit people kind of know it. They might have big Instagram following and whatnot, but like, are they really that credible, or are they just good at marketing themselves? And where Sitka has been, I think John, of all the influencers that Sitka has, and I'm biased because I really like him, but of all the influencers, and Sitka really has an amazing team of people that rep their stuff and some legit hunters for sure.
Absolutely.
But there is nobody that Sitka's got that has more just respect and credibility than that guy. I mean, every hunter I know, they're just like, I roll with Sitka because as long as John is in charge of helping develop that stuff and standing behind it, like, that guy's got so much credibility.
Well, yeah, and it's credibility comes from a lot of places, and it's his background, but in general, I think it's just it's a legacy for him.
Yeah,
too, right. He's helping create things that came from lots of experiences you just don't get. Like, you just don't get that anywhere else, right? And so he, I think, and that's why he's starting to do more podcasts and other things, right? So he's moved past it. I mean, I'm watching him tell people about why they should change their shoelaces in their boots and what they should pack in their cars in the winter in case things go wrong, or he's in generally like helping kind of make people more aware, make them more prepared. We do that as hunters, we do that as backcountry people. That's a level, but the fact that he does that, it speaks to his credibility, because I think in the end of the day, he's generally just trying to help.
Yeah,
right. Like, he's not going to get rich doing any of these things.
It's actually funny because we've tried to actually like get on board to help him or maybe sponsor it or whatever, and he's really not somebody that's, there's so many people with their hands out wanting you to sponsor like an idea before they've even done it.
Right.
And John's just doing this stuff and putting this stuff out there and letting it grow organically.
Yeah.
And I constantly will share his, stories on my Instagram and be like, if you guys want to hunt and go in the backcountry for a long time, like for days on end, and you got to watch what this guy says. I mean, I personally watch that stuff and like go through my pack and like analyze what I'm doing, because he's got way more experience than I do. But a lot of times credibility is based on what you've done. But what's cool about John is he still goes out and actually does the thing too.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, as far as hunting goes, he hunts hard.
Yeah, he does. He spends a lot of time in the field. Spends a lot of time with other people, a lot of time training, a lot to be said there. And I think this is where you led in the beginning, right? All brands have different folks that are part of them and help with their story. Yeah. Right. And the story is not fictional. I'm talking about non-fictional, right? Things that really matter. And, you find these people once in a while. And, he's been one of the biggest movers, I think, in that brand, specifically in that brand, and even, saying we're working on, other problems to solve and advanced things, John's always contributing to that. Right.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing.
What so personally, speaking of going out and hunting and stuff, what are your favorite hunts to go on? What's your favorite like species? What do you like to do?
Yeah, so when I first kind of started, the first collection I did at Sitka was whitetail, and it's kind of how I grew up. I grew up whitetail hunting. And still for me, that holds a pretty special place in my heart. It's not for everybody. You sit for days and don't move. And I think a lot of folks in the West are kind of mesmerized by that people actually care to do that. But
we also don't have the whitetail run around that the people like. I think I'd be a lot more mesmerized to walk out behind my house and sit for 9 hours if I knew there was giants running around.
Oh yeah, but still for me, I gotta say that first, second week in November, rut hunting in the Midwest specifically is probably my favorite thing to do, and that says a lot because I really enjoy elk hunting. And I find myself a lot of times working for a company like Gore that not everybody hunts, and sometimes kind of the guy from Sitka that helps them understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I try to explain to people it's that when you have to pick something, it's hard because our waterfowl market I feel is very communal. Like it's 6 guys sitting in a blind, talking about their life problems, talking about the things
having
they
a little
do.
schnapps,
having a little schnapps, right? They're just hanging out, having a good time, and it's very social. And then elk hunting is extremely physical. It's like hey, like
wait, you're not drinking schnapps while you're
not drinking schnapps. You might have a flask for when you actually make it happen.
Yeah,
but you're hiking, you're putting your head down, you're hiking up, and you're testing yourself. You're proving to yourself that you can do this.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a self learning and experience, but it's extreme and it's breathtaking in lots of ways. But then whitetail is like very extremely mental. Right?
Yeah, and I was actually
exercise.
thinking while you were saying that whitetail's similar to elk hunting, but in a different way.
It is
of forcing you to sit in that stand an extra 2 more hours, or walk into your stand 2 hours earlier and sit there in the dark for 2 more hours.
Right.
And I remember I did a ton of tree stand hunting when I was a kid growing up because I couldn't drive. My parents didn't hunt, but I wanted to hunt so bad. So I bought tree stands, at like garage sales. And I still to this day, I'm not sure how I got them in the tree and how they stayed there. Like I can only imagine what a shit show that was.
Oh boy, that was before lifelines and
seriously,
and harnesses.
Yeah. And stealing nails out of my dad's shed to use spikes to get up in the tree, or usually just trying to find a tree that had enough branches to go up there.
How we survived, I have no idea.
I actually was telling my dad the other day, I said, I cannot believe you guys let me do that. And my dad said, well, you had help from like Carl or Jay or somebody, right? And I was like, no.
Not at all.
No, like I'd be at their house and they'd kind of tell me how they do it. And then I went home and like walked out from the house and just figured it out. And I still have no idea the shitty ratchet straps I'd find laying around to strap a stand to a tree. I have no idea how they stayed in there. But I will say it was a way for me to hunt without having wheels to be able to go somewhere, or I could just walk out. It was similar to where I live now, where there was river bottom behind us. But the biggest struggle was fighting off the mental part of I'm cold. It feels like it doesn't matter how you dress, you're still going to have some level of cold. And I guarantee you, I was dressing cotton and
all the wrong things.
All the woolly, yeah. And I was freezing my ass off. But also just bored as hell.
Yeah.
And also I didn't have the experience of like figuring out trails and doing this pre-scouting. And I'm just like, this looks like a place a deer might like walk by,
Right.
But that struggle of sitting there.
Oh yeah. There's the mental struggle you have with yourself. I mean, I got to use the bathroom. Like, how much longer do I stay? And
I got shit to do at the house. I should probably be
Am I
home.
wasting time?
Yes.
Right. And, but then there's, like you said, there's the learning an animal and patterning him and, trying to get within 25 yards for an ethical shot. Right. And it's a whole nother thing. And then try to do that with a mature whitetail, which is the spookiest animal on the planet, especially a Midwestern, whitetail. Right. It's different. It's a mental challenge. Big games, I feel, is extremely physical. And then, duck hunting is extremely social in lots of ways, right? And so it's hard to pick one, I enjoy them all, right? I have a waterfowl dog. We talk about it all the time, right? Rowan, so she's great. I know you're raising
How did she do this
around
year?
the same time. We're getting her into it. She's, we call this her red shirt year.
Yeah.
Right. So this on purpose was just her to start acclimating, so let me answer that question next year. But
Yeah.
she's doing. I'll just say she's the academic who's ace in her class. We just gotta convert it next year. That's the challenge.
That's growing up. I trained a bird dog, and that was by the time I had a driver's license and kind of through I think I got her my sophomore, junior, senior year into college. Man, I duck hunted my butt off and pheasant hunted. Honestly, we didn't have, like, Lincoln where I grew up wasn't the best flyway. I mean, you kind of had your local birds, you jump shoot them.
Yeah.
You definitely weren't going to go set up decoys and sit anywhere. But we would drive over by, like, Fairfield, Power, that area, and we would hunt pheasants and do the upland stuff. And watching a dog work that you trained is so cool, and watching a dog succeed and start to really figure it out.
Oh yeah.
To me, the bird hunting stuff with that, it is social a bit. You can go walk a field with your buddy, but really that excitement of seeing your dog, seeing it start to click.
Yeah.
And like you say, when they start hitting 2 years old, and then all of a sudden 3 and 4, and it's like game on. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, they hit their prime. I mean, gosh, anybody on this, it's that waterfowl hunts. How often is the guy with the bird dog? His gun doesn't ever leave, like leave the prop up that you put in the middle of the blind, right? He's so engaged, or she's so engaged with, like, running that dog, and, like, that's all they need, right?
Yeah.
That relationship.
It's a lot like
amazing.
watching your kids succeed when you're a dad growing up and you're taking your son or daughter out.
Yeah.
Because I've shot very little stuff over the last several years while my kids have been growing up, but every year my kids get a deer. Last year my 12 and 14-year-olds got elk. Hank got 2. He shot a bear by himself. Like, those are kind of like wins with your bird dog as well.
Yeah.
The ones with your kids mean even more, obviously, but it all of a sudden just doesn't become about yourself or what you're harvesting. It becomes about them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I at the end of the day, we've kind of beat on the outdoor industry, but the hunting experience is like, I know your son, elk hunting this year was a big deal for you, right?
Yeah.
And you'll never let that go. And we talked about my son shooting an elk, and time with your dog and all this other stuff, right? And we started off by saying, gosh, what are those short windows of time worth to you in comfort, right? It kind of all manifests to, like, this whole idea that, I don't know. I feel like I'm getting older these days and reflecting a little more, but it's that's where the good stuff is, right?
Yeah.
That's where the good stuff is, right? You farm the good stuff. I have fun at work. I really enjoy my job every day. I think I find it challenging, right? But the good stuff, the real good stuff, happens in those other areas, right? It happens time with your kids, time with your dog, and
you're a little further along than I am with the kid stuff, but I'm already looking back. Like, I have a daughter that's now a freshman, college age, and another daughter that's about to graduate, and I'm already, like, regretting not spending more time doing that stuff. And which, it's not too late. I still have kids at home, and I think to myself, like, God, I gotta force and make sure I carve out more time. And it's easy, actually, with what I'm doing right now, to be so busy, or to revolve all our hunting, frankly, around, like, some kind of, like, a marketing strategy, right? Or a video you got to shoot or something.
Yep.
And of everything we did last year, taking my wife hunting and having her get an elk, and then taking my kids hunting and having them get elk, was by far better than anything that we even accomplished as a business, which is just kind of wild to think about. Like, those are the things you remember. And I actually tell my kids, we've been a heavy sports family over the years, and we've spent hundreds upon hundreds, thousands of hours in a gym.
Yeah.
And I asked Hank here a while back, I said, my son, I said, what's your best moment in youth sports so far? What moment do you remember the most? And he really couldn't even think of one. And I said, that's kind of my point. Like, you'll remember youth sports as, like, a whole.
Yeah.
Like, you played sports, right? And you were good at it and you had fun, but you really can't remember anything specifically you did in any of those years, any of those seasons that you thought you couldn't miss practice or you couldn't miss a game. But if I ask any of my kids about any of their bucks on the wall that they've got in the house, or any of the hunts we went on, they literally remember, like, where we set up our camper, what we cooked, what fields we hunted in. They remember everything.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows you how impactful hunting is. And that's, like, for people who maybe don't hunt, man, if you can even get your kid out and help them, and maybe you don't hunt yourself, but just enable that kid to get out in the field, that'll be the thing that those people remember, kind of like with you and your stepdad.
Yeah.
Of all of the things in your childhood, I'm sure it's those memories with him that you remember the most.
Oh, absolutely. You know, and it's kind of, I don't know, you kind of look at it that way, and it's so easy. You said it in your business, right? You're like, hey, I got all these things. I'm trying to change an industry. We talked about trying to change an industry, right? You can sell yourself on that stuff, and it doesn't make it wrong, right? You are impacting a lot of people.
Yeah.
And you're giving them opportunities, or you're trying to help them enjoy the things that they do even more. But taking that special time, I remember, you know, my son, we had Whitetail Wednesdays, right? So every Wednesday I committed that no matter what, we were going hunting, right? We were going to go sit in a tree stand every Wednesday. And, you know, I had a good friend, Sean McKinney, who he had, you know, he was doing the filming thing, and everybody was at that time. And so I bought a camera, and my son was he was just able to shoot targets, right? He was right at the legal draw limits, but I didn't trust that he was ready to really, you know, ethically harvest an animal yet, right? But we bought that camera, and on Whitetail Wednesdays, I had double sets, and he filmed me. The idea wasn't the camera footage of me.
Right.
The idea was that he was present, right?
Yeah.
Go back to that idea of being present. He was present, he was paying attention, and he was learning,
Yeah.
right? And we were mic'd up. And then once he got old enough, you know, then I started filming him. But we have all those memories now. We have them all on film, right? And I just say that because it was a conscious decision.
Yeah.
Right? And this isn't a public service announcement. I don't mean it to be that way or
Right.
preachy. But it is true. Like all of us, we all get hung up in our dailies, and, you know, we try to make time for things. But, you know, sometimes that ritual, you know, means a lot to people, and it helps you make that time. And I bet you he still remembers that today. You know, so now I got grandkids, because you said I'm further along than you are, and I am. I have 4 of them, right? But now I'm like, gosh, how do I repeat that, right? Because it is important that you, like, you know, maybe it's important they didn't think that was about creating content for MKC.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I mean, you know, and it's okay that it was or wasn't, right? But at the end of the day, they were the most important person in the room.
It's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of like the people that suggest, you know, that you schedule a date with your wife.
Right. Same idea.
You know, that if you schedule meetings at work, that you also schedule in time for your spouse, or especially when you have little kids and you got a job, and it's easy to
absolutely
push, you know, your wife aside for more important, quote unquote, things, or same with your kids, and just not get out with them and do stuff with them. And it's something I got to definitely be better at. I do pretty good, and I get compliments on it, and all I can think to myself is like, yeah, but I should be doing more. You know, because I definitely don't do it as much as I should.
Yeah.
You know,
and it is a conscious thing. And gosh, you probably hear this all the time. I know I do. I'm sure you're busy.
Yes.
Like people, they call you, I'm sure you're busy. Like they feel guilty sometimes, you know, taking your time. And it's like, gosh, no, don't feel that way, right? Like this is the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you got to make the plan for it, right?
Yeah.
It goes hand in hand with good gear, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, you got to be present. Right? Like that theme isn't just about making better decisions about things that last a lifetime and things that make you comfortable or things that don't break when you need them. It's a lifestyle decision, right?
Yeah.
It is every part of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super cool. Well, cool. So the last thing I was going to ask you about is fishing.
Yeah.
You seem to really enjoy fishing. Do you have a fly fishing raft yourself, or you just are always going over here with Donnie?
I do. I have a fly fishing raft myself. I know you rode me around a little bit, so I did just get it though. Because I grew up on the East Coast, and I still have a place on the Chesapeake Bay actually. So
oh really?
So I still go back because, you know, Gore's there, and it just gives me I'll call it my pop-off valve, right? It's a place I go and just kind of relax.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit of a river rat, and so I kind of grew up fishing that way, and a little bit of fly fishing, but. You know, so with Donnie Wilson, plug for Donnie, thank you, brother, and you know, even yourself, I've gotten, you know, to really enjoy, you know, floating the rivers of Montana and fly fishing there. So I finally got a raft, and, you know, trying to draw Smith River tags, and, you know, did a really great float this year in the Big Hole. And
did you?
Yeah, it was so much fun. Yeah, like 4 days and just pull off and camp, right? Like that's
amazing. That's the thing about fishing. there again, another social sport. You know, it's weird how
Yeah.
we have those social sports like with duck hunting or, you know, upland hunting or whatever, and then with fishing. That time to just sit in a boat for 4 hours with somebody, kind of out of cell phone service most of the time, even if you aren't, you're too busy fishing and doing stuff, and just bullshitting with your buddy, you know, going slow, floating down the river, looking at the scenery, and playing that cat and mouse game with the fish. It's a super cool experience. I definitely want to do the overnight thing on the river. I've done it one time. We went on a canoe trip on the Missouri. The last day the wind blew in our face, we had to paddle our asses off for 8 hours. That wasn't relaxing. The first day was relaxing, floating. But the overnight thing, I love that idea of loading the raft up. In fact, to kind of spin that out even further, I really love the idea of taking a raft and floating, like, you know, in Alaska and doing a moose hunt from a raft.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That
totally.
to me would be, you know, and you can do that. You can do that DIY. You got to have
Yeah.
place to get the gear, and I would love to go do it. I just like I have a healthy respect to water, so it's like strange to get on a river you don't know and just hop on a raft.
Yeah. Yeah. But to your point though, you cover so much. You cover so much land.
Yeah,
and
because
you
I
see
know
so
guys that have
much.
been dropped off up there on lakes, and I know guys that have succeeded at it,
Yeah.
and I know guys that haven't seen shit. And, you know, for a moose, like, you know, elk hunting or deer hunting, you can hike for miles, especially in our country.
Right.
But up there, these guys will be like, yeah, we saw a moose 2 miles away, but we didn't even go after it because it was going to be completely impossible to get that animal back to camp.
Right.
So you're really limited to your area. Where with a raft, if you're on a 10-day float trip, you can slowly just float that river down and just wait for something to walk out or stop and hike and glass and call.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a badass trip.
Oh my, I totally agree. And I mean, gosh, you know, as
Sitka
human,
should sponsor that. We should go.
right? We'll put stickers all over the boat.
Yeah.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, that'd be an absolute blast. But that fly fishing, like with Donnie, one of the things I'll never forget it. We were out fishing with Donnie last year, and Dennis was in Donnie's boat, and I had Hank, and I was trying to teach Hank how to fly fish. And I'm not the greatest fly fisherman. I can cast, but I don't know. And Donnie knows like every river under the water surface, or every rock. He knows every rock, every log.
He's calling the fish. He's
Yes,
pointing
he's
out
like,
where
Bob,
he's going to sit.
Bob lives
Yeah.
under this log up here.
Right.
Be ready. And so Hank keeps hooking fish, but not landing anything in our boat, like all day. And Dennis and Donnie kept smashing fish and smashing fish. And so finally, Donnie pulls over and he's like, all right, have Hank get in with me. Dennis, you're going with Josh. And we landed one or two.
Yeah.
We landed a couple more fish. But Hank kept snagging or hooking them, but not landing them. And on the very last,
That's right.
like you and I were probably lagged back, 500 yards or something. Hank and Donnie were way up in front of us. And all of a sudden, just this eruption of noise comes from the river. And Dennis is like, I'm pretty sure they've landed one. And you just see Hank and Donnie like standing up in the boat, hugging each other and hooting and hollering.
Oh gosh. And it was the best ending, right? I won't forget this, right? So, we're all pulling out, right, to add to that. And Hank's just standing there on the shoreline. He's smiling from ear to ear. The poor kid has missed more fish than that day than you could shake a stick at, right?
Yeah.
Is he upset about that? No way.
No.
He is like on that, like he's telling the story, how amazing it was.
Yeah.
I mean,
Greatest day ever.
Greatest day ever. Like that one fish made his entire day.
Yeah.
It
And it was just
awesome.
that challenge of like, I got to get this fish on the boat. Like everyone he hooked. Dang it. Dang it. I compare a lot to like golf. You can just golf like shit the whole day and hit balls in the water and hit balls out of bounds and 5 putt holes and do all this. And on hole number 9, you like stuff it an inch from the hole and tap in for birdie, and you're like, can't wait to come back and golf.
Oh yeah. Oh, he's ready to go now. He's like, so you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. He's like, oh, I got it figured out.
Yeah.
I'm going to land everything next
Oh,
time.
yeah. I was just doing this wrong.
Yeah. I got it figured. And it was funny because Donnie actually told Hank, there's a fish that lives under this rock. Like, this is your last chance. Because where Hank caught that fish, you could literally see our vehicles at the takeout.
Oh yeah.
It was the last chance. There wasn't 100 yards of river left. And he slammed that trout. And it was a good trout, too. It was awesome.
Yeah, that was a great day. Yeah, I do recall that. Hank was just so excited.
But that's the point. Like, Hank will, of all the, and Hank's a pretty accomplished athlete. He's a pretty good little athlete. And he's won little, trophies and football championships and all the stuff, right? Won basketball tournaments, the whole 9 yards. When he's 40, he will not remember a single game he played, but he will absolutely remember that fish with you and Donnie. Like, he will forever. He still talks about it.
Oh, that's the
Pretty
good
cool.
stuff.
Yeah.
Back to that's the good stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We should make a T-shirt like that.
Yeah.
Just like a guy with a fish hooked and just
The
say
good
that's
stuff.
the good stuff.
The good stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Totally.
So
We could put a knife in it or something. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to overbrand it. We'll just,
Maybe not.
yeah. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Appreciate your friendship. It was awesome having you here, kind of showing you around the facility today, and hopefully we can do some more of these, and more importantly, hopefully we can do some more fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to tell you, there's lots of blessings in your life, and I think moving to Montana was a big one. But the people I've met since I've been here, and Josh, you're on that list.
Oh, well, thanks.
It means a lot, having friends like you guys, and gosh, the fact it's a double down ante to see that what you're doing, and I truly believe in it. I don't just say that. So, congratulations for now, but I'm gonna hold that for next year for other things you're gonna make happen.
No, I appreciate that, and I've said several times. I say this all the time. My absolute favorite part of doing what we're doing is getting to meet the people. Going to Sheep Show a couple weeks ago, or we're going down to Western Hunt pretty soon. But like the Total Archery Challenges, my favorite part of it, and like our customers, the DMs that we get, the messages, and we're smaller, so I see all that stuff. It's probably harder at a big brand to see all the emails and messages come in, and I think that's the part that's so exciting, and I think that's the stuff that you need when you're small and growing, because when you're staring at that mountain that seems impossible, you read those messages every day, or you meet those people in the store at Home Depot or wherever, and they give you like that energy of like, wow, we are doing something kind of cool here. And then the other people in the brands, I say this all the time, whether it's competitors of Sitka's, or it's multiple different pack companies, if it's Aaron Snyder or somebody at Eberly Stock, it doesn't matter. People at Leupold, there's good people behind all these huge brands. A guy like Barklow, right? You think about Sitka and how big Gore is and everything, but when you distill all that down, there's like super cool people that are actually pulling the levers at these brands. The marketing director for this company, or the product guy for this company. And it's like, man, no matter how big these companies are, they come down to people like you. And it's what makes you really want to support even the big, huge brands. It's like, yeah, they're huge, but there's a guy like Dennis or John in there working every single day to make it happen. So it's definitely my favorite part.
It means a lot, because it's hopefully we're all trying to create those great moments together.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what it's all about.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go have some more whiskey.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Take care, buddy.